Okay, good afternoon. This is Sunday, June 15th, 2025. The day after my brother's birthday, the president's birthday, and a small parade in my hometown, which was about as I think the Nationals versus the Marlins, two of the worst teams, got a better crowd because they were giving away Hawaiian shirts. But that's DC this weekend. A lot of excitement going on in the country, a lot of scary things going along around the country. Um, Immigration certainly hit the front th this week, the front page of whatever you're reading, the screen of whatever you're watching, because we know that throughout the country, the incredible clampdown, the incredible use of um, what looks like, guys they dragged off of a either semi-pro beer league softball or you know s- eh, possibly an unemployment line. Who knows? These ICE agents in masks, not identifying, showing up in courts, showing up in public places, showing up, trying to get into public schools, religious institutions, and um, in the case of Los Angeles, raiding anywhere that they see Latinos, which is everywhere in Los Angeles. So this is it's crazy. They are we see videos. Anybody who has TikTok can see the many videos of them harassing um, uh, U.S. citizen, often Latino or other brown uh, young men. It's completely out of control. We know what the administration feels and does on this, and we know that we're getting some opposition from the Democrats, but we know that, that's where the hope will come from. And so uh, today we have with us an amazing guest who is extremely generous to give his time, as always, Mo Goldman. Welcome, Mo.
Thanks
Uh,
so much.
Mo is you started in 2000. You're a millennial.
I started practicing law 2000, correct?
2000, yeah, you're a couple few, about 2.5 years behind me. Um, but uh, Mo has been, he's in Tucson, Arizona. He's not far from the border, does all kinds of immigration law practices with his mom, Gloria Goldman, who is an absolutely fabulous attorney, person, and one of my original mentors before I even heard of Mo. I knew that Gloria was the person who understood everything about kids. So I don't know. I don't know how that works as a parent, but it certainly works as a lawyer. And so any issues that ever I had at the beginning with kids, and on all different levels, Gloria was there, as a mentor. And so that was great. And so Mo, though, has decided that enough is enough. Mo's done a lot of work to try to make his community better over the years, and to try to make immigration laws better over the years, along with his practice. And Mo's decided, you know what? My state should not have, my town, Tucson, should not have uh, a Republican follower of Trump on there because it does not protect the citizens. It doesn't serve the community. And he's decided to toss his hat into a fairly crowded field in the Democratic primary in Arizona 6th. So, Mo, why did you leave the inspiring, amazing world of immigration law? Should you get elected and decide to embark on this political career?
Good question. Thank you for having me, Mark. And it was not easy for me to decide to do this. I think a lot of people have to consider when you're doing any sort of drastic change in career or even, deciding to run for Congress, you've got to consider all weighing the pros and cons of why you're doing it. And after the election in 2024, I was getting inundated And I think a lot of lawyers who specialize in immigration law were getting inundated with, fear-based calls. People were scared. But even beyond that, there were a lot of people in our community who had not been in the immigration advocacy world. They hadn't really been involved in that. Um, who were reaching out to me saying and asking me, how can we help people during this time? We know what's coming. What can we do? And it got to the point where I'd have dozens and dozens of people asking me that question. I mean, it was pretty amazing, that so much energy was being generated to helping others and wanting to. But the question became, how do laypersons who are not lawyers, how can they help immigrants? And so what I did, I decided, let me do an event at my office. And I picked a Sunday in early December, and I invited people to come to my office, and the response was pretty phenomenal. We got a lot of people who came from all walks of life. We had people who were in the faith community. We had people who had, just been on social media who heard that I was going to do this presentation. And then word got out to people who were not in Tucson, not in our local community, and I started getting emails from people from all over, even across the country, who wanted to be on Zoom. And when it was all said and done, I'd say total, I had about 200 people attend. Very organic. I had like 40 to 50 in my office. And then I had another like 140, 150 online
So was this
on
mostly
Zoom.
just like a question and answer?
So I'll tell you what I did was I put together a PowerPoint presentation, and the presentation went into what are people's rights? So I did it as a know your rights so that people could educate other people because knowledge is power, obviously, and we all needed a refresher on our rights and on our neighbors' rights and on especially immigrants' rights. So I did a know your rights presentation, but I coupled it with what sort of tips do you or I have as immigration practitioners for people who want to help immigrants? Like, what can they do within their means or abilities? And so it was more about like giving them practical tips. Like, number one, if somebody needs support financially on a case, they're facing deportation, if you have the means, maybe you can support them that way. Or, if you want to support nonprofit organizations who are under attack under this administration, you could donate to those organizations. Or you could donate to a bond fund to help people get bonded out of detention. And it's not all just financial money-based volunteering options. I mean, I talked about how they could volunteer with some of the local refugee organizations, or if they have a specialization in mental health or social work, maybe they could do evaluations. There's a lot of different ways that people can volunteer and help out. And then we also, I brought another attorney on, a wonderful woman named Yendi Castillo, and she presented about family planning so that people knew how they could help people get powers of attorney or different types of like guardianships and, other types of legal documents that would be important. And then
So
another,
let me just say, so for family planning, you're not talking about what we see in the drugstore as family planning. You're talking
yeah.
about you're at school. Like my son's had that too, and I've waited for a meeting at his school when he was in middle school, and the calls would come that a parent's deported. The things, and those are happening more now, where a family has a parent deported or somebody who didn't, make it here, or something else where they're under the radar. So it's sort of this support level. That's what
Yeah,
you're.
and it's a way to have a legal document in case if the parent gets deported, who's going to have
Right.
custody over those kids?
Right.
And if they don't have those in place, who will take it? The state.
Yep. And they'll go into
And then they
foster
end up
care.
in the system.
Yep.
And that's a widespread problem right now. I was just reading that hundreds of kids are now in the custody of the government because they didn't have things like this in place, or they just, didn't know that it was an option, or they just didn't have the people to support them on that. So it's a shame. Um, and then I took questions. It went on for a while, and in the aftermath of that, um, you know, I I started to do like an email list with a lot of the attendees, and I would just send them, what events were happening, giving them some additional pointers. And then we fast forward, and this was again in December of 2024. Fast forward to the end of January, and just the aftermath of what was going on after the inauguration, after Trump signed the Lincoln-Riley Act, seeing so many Democrats sign on and co-sponsor that horrendous bill.
No, what was that?
So the Lincoln-Riley Act, which, if for the listener, was a bill that would allow the federal government to detain people under what's called mandatory detention or without a bond if they were arrested and even without an actual conviction, even if it was just a charge, they could be detained, um, and under certain, types of criminal
Crimes.
violations. But it included shoplifting and
Yes.
very low level criminal issues. And it's a pretext for people to get detained and held in our private prisons, with no ability to get out. And what we saw when people like you and I were looking at it was immediately the ways that that sort of a law could be abused. So, for example, you have an abusive husband or an abusive business owner who wants to control the immigrant that either is married to that person or is working for that person. And they, don't like that that person's trying to get away from them or something like that. They could easily make a phone call to the, police and have that person arrested and claim they stole something, and next thing you know, that person who's undocumented is in detention and they're caught up in the web. And so, there are these aspects to it that just really bothered me. And then I started getting people reaching out to me again, kind of saying, what can we do? What role do we have right now where it seems like everything is so helpless? Um, and it was at that moment, like that first week of February, where I just like it just started getting into my mind, creeping in there, saying, you know what, Mo, you could sit in this office at this desk that I'm at right now and just keep hearing and seeing so much heartache and pain. Or you can take what you've gained over the last 25 years and the goodwill that you've harbored through all the communities you've worked with. And also, I just kept thinking to myself, what about the immigration legal community? We are under attack. Like, literally a week after he became president, Trump put out that executive memorandum that said that immigration lawyers are committing fraud and that we're fraught with fraud and all this, like, just awful crap that he was spewing. And I looked at that and said, you know what? Enough of this shit. It's time to, like, put up or shut up. And it's not just defending my reputation and our legal community's reputation. It's about stepping up when we have representatives like the one we have right now in our district who doesn't do anything to push back against this president, despite the fact that he is an immigrant who talks out openly about how he's the embodiment of the American dream and he naturalized. Well, what about everybody else, dude?
Right.
So I just said, fuck this shit.
Yeah.
I'm running for Congress. I mean, I said somebody's got to step up. We got to stop worrying about what someone says. Like I just said, like I said, bad word. Ooh, you're going to be offended by that. We have worse problems going on right now. We've got an authoritarian president who, is a convicted criminal. So stop worrying about all these other sideshows, or what somebody has to say, whether they say a foul word or whatever. Stop clutching your pearls. Let's start focusing on the real problems and issues and get some solutions out there.
So why did you think it wouldn't have been better to support one of the other Democrats running?
Well, I didn't even know who was running at the time. It just happened I mean, it was early because
Your
this
team of
election's
consultants
not
failed
an
you? Your team of consultants, of high-powered consultants failed you, huh? You're,
Well, no, there was at that point there was like one person, one lady who was running with any sort of maybe name recognition or who was raising a good amount of money. There was one other guy who I've met, really nice dude named Chris Donat, nice dude. You know, I looked at them both and I said, you guys both have very good backgrounds. You have good, stories, but what you don't have is the community and the community-based work that I've been doing for 20 plus years.
so talk about that a
And
little bit. Talk about
yeah,
some of that.
so when I worked in New York for 5 years after passing and opening up, passing the bar exam, opening my office in New York. And like you were saying, Gloria Goldman, my mom was a very important mentor to me because as young lawyers, were you working at Maggio at one point, right?
Yeah, yeah. I was working at Maggio when it
Yeah.
was my first immigration job as a, yeah.
So, I mean, you had some built-in mentors in your
Oh yeah,
office, but they might not have been as specialized in like VAWA, Violence Against Women Act
right.
petitions or stuff that my mom was specialized in. And I was on an island all on my own out in New York. I had my own little office. So I had to depend on her to help me through some of the initial understanding of how complicated the law and the regs and the memos and the case law and all the other stuff that goes with it. And so she was real helpful. So I worked there for 5 years and I got very active with AILA over there, the American Immigration Lawyers Association.
Mhm.
I mean, I was on a fast track to possibly being in the AILA leadership for New York, but I just at one point in '05 said, you know what, let's go to Arizona. And so I moved out here to Tucson. And when I got out here, I mean, the first thing I started doing was just trying to get out and help with volunteering in the community, which had always been what I did. I even did that out in New York post 9/11, worked with the Muslim community after the registration, the End Sears program, where Bush and Ashcroft were requiring men, I think it was like between the ages of, was it 16 and
Yeah.
79 or
Yes,
something
yes.
from
Like basically
30
puberty
something.
to death.
Yeah. Who
Almost.
had entered on tourist visas and overstayed. Um, and, uh, and that was, I did a lot of workshops with them, and it was a big eye opener for me about um, how horrible our government can be in the aftermath of difficult times, or all the time, but especially in the aftermath of that horrific situation.
I mean, how quickly it can get to be blaming immigrants and how
Yeah.
far down it goes. I mean, I always call, and we've talked about it before, but I always say that, you know, uh, IRA, the 1996 immigration law, was probably one of the. I mean, I put it up there with the Fugitive Slave Act, and uh, uh, you know, as
It's a
far as
terrible law. Yeah.
some of the most horrific laws, and that law was considered a quote compromise. It passed the Senate 97-3. It
Yeah.
was almost universal, and it was considered almost innocuous because it came after the Oklahoma City bombing. It came after
World Trade Center,
the World Trade Center in 93, the Oklahoma
Pan
City
Am.
5, yep, in the late 80s, and also the torching of one thing people don't talk a lot about, which is really important, is that I mean, essentially, right-wing fascist violence in the United States grew so large. I mean, Pan Am was a different story because that was the North Koreans, but certainly Oklahoma City, um, the burning of black churches all through the South, which you saw Jerry Falwell and Al Sharpton both together speak against, but that kind of was put to the side. And also, the Olympic bombing, was around then too. And so
The
there was
rise of David Duke.
Yes. So there was this feeling of uh, uh te domestic terrorism was huge in the US, and the agents, and uh, in part because those things were in our DNA, because some of those attacks were legal years before, like lynchings and etc., were commonplace, that the blame the went towards immigrants,
Sure.
when the only thing perpetrated by immigrants was, the two World Trade Center attacks, and they were perpetrated by immigrants. I mean, 9/11 after, but before were immigrants with means and money, and the people that were most affected were the same people that we see right now being attacked, and I think we just have to say attacked, and arrested violently by these people that look like they're dressed. They're dressed
Like those, yeah.
like they're 12, like I dressed when I was 12. They're like, they're dressed like kids.
Flannel t-shirts or flannel shirts and jeans is
I
like
mean,
yeah.
I was with a couple. Yeah, it's like that in a very uh ha haphazard way, and they're the ones who suffered most through these laws that made things very permanent and created a situation where it became almost impossible to legalize yourself in the United States if you came across the border illegally. So all these people from Mexico who can't get visas and plane, or from South America or anywhere really in the Southern Hemisphere, are going to come in through the border, whereas somebody like, Muhammad Atta and his friends on 9/11, they're going to get visas because nobody's going to think that they're not going to go back to their, you know, billions in Saudi Arabia. They're
Well,
they're
not
so
back then, especially.
right. Yeah, and so
So
so that's what happened there, and I guess we kind of see that a little bit now. Um
so I will
mhm,
tell you though. So
yeah.
I came out here and I just started doing a lot of work with like that. There were multiple community-based organizations that I volunteered with, and then I was a chair of the Jewish Community Relations Council and served on their committee for a long time. And I just started to branch out into a lot of different communities. But on top of that, I was very outspoken about this rise of xenophobia and just a lot of just hate rhetoric that was coming out, even, going back 20 years. But I was also the chair of the Arizona AILA, American Immigration Lawyers Association chapter, when Arizona's SB 1070 bill became law. And so it put a lot of responsibility on me to be more outspoken than the average person.
That was
Um,
2010 for the people out,
yeah,
the
2010.
listeners.
And
Yes.
I just knew that like I had a calling to maybe, be a new and different voice at a time where we need that. When we don't need the same old voices, and lead with my immigration knowledge. Like, how many people have the knowledge? Like if I said INA, Immigration Nationality Act, section 212A9B or 212A9C. I could say that to, you know, hundreds of Congress people, and mass majority of them will have no idea what law that is. But you and I know, and anyone who does immigration law as a specialization knows that those are two of those laws that came out of the Immigration Act of 1996, that those sections have created more of this problem than any other law on the books. And the reality is, right now, the Democrats should be going every day on the news, on social media, going into their committee meetings, and holding the GOP accountable for not working with them to abolish these sections and some of the other areas of our laws that have created the problems that they're decrying.
I mean, I guess the question then is, while that's true, and it's not true of the Republicans of until about 2017, but once 2017 came, okay, I think once your late Senator McCain,
Again,
once he stopped putting the thumb down, he might have been the last one to vote against something that in lockstep, more or less. And so maybe Rand Paul's are a little bit now, but but it's they're pretty unanimous. And even when you were talking about Lake and Riley, I know that we had a series, maybe 12 Democrats voted for that. And when you're talking about these reforms, I guess, the point is, and I've worked in some state things also. I have an overall, while we have the reactionary part of our state, your state really does have this half and half. I mean, you've got some of the absolute most bigoted anti-immigrant people in the country, and thinking of Ghosts Aren't Bigs offhand. And while you also have Raul Grijalva, and we mostly have just
we
good
have
Democrats. We just have your average Democrats who are
yeah,
going to worry about this, and they're not going to want to bring it up, and they're going to think we can't
but
go to, what was that?
that's the beauty of having an immigration lawyer running for Congress right now against an immigrant who lost his direction, lost his way,
Now, where's he
because
from?
he's from Mexico.
He's from Mexico. Okay.
But the beauty of having someone like me run in this time right now,
Hmm.
that while the Dems have often been very like coy to addressing the immigration issue, I will hit it head on, and I will get out into communities and talk to people who would normally not support Democrats just because they have a D next to their name, but talk to them and listen to them about why they have their concerns on immigration, and educate them on what, for example, those two sections of the law that I mentioned, 212A 9B and C, those sections of our immigration law serve as a disincentive to do it the right way. You want people to leave the United States. The reason why those laws are so bad is because they force people to stay here without legal status, because the moment they leave this country, they're going to face either a 3 year or a 10 year or a permanent bar from re-entering the United States. What sort of incentive do people have to leave when the incentive is to stay here?
Yeah. And and one of the reasons, we're doing this show, and one of the reasons that, I've also gone into the public arena and been that person, is that um we are incredibly pigeonholed, and people have ideas and don't really get it. But once they kind of do, and it reminds me of your neighboring state has a federal judge, Brack, who was, I saw him on the cover of Time magazine because he had the most convictions of any federal judge in the country. And all of his convictions were for um uh illegal reentry into the United States.
Yeah.
So somebody who, and you were talking about the permanent bar. Just briefly tell us what that means in a way
So
that,
yeah, in more of like a layperson's.
oh no, absolutely a layperson. And I'll tell you what
Well,
what Judge
let me
Brack was
just give you
talking
an
about.
example.
Yeah,
All right, let me give you an example. Um, I s- I spoke to a man, and this will show how absurd. I mean, there are some absurdities in our immigration system. This is an example that I intend to use moving forward more often. I just interviewed a woman for my campaign because I want my campaign to be very geared towards people in the community and
grassroots.
yeah, grassroots, not so much like, oh yeah, people walk into politics all the time and say, yeah, this is all about me. I'm a cult of personality. No, I'm the sounding board for people. And this woman called me up. Her name's Ethel, 91 years old. And she called me up and said, I want to help a friend of mine named Pedro, goes by Peter. And she said the following. He's in Mexico and he can't get back now. And I was like, well, that sounds like the permanent bar. Um, and and I'll explain a little more about that in a second. But then she says there are people in Mexico, lawyers or some sort of unscrupulous individuals, who are trying to convince him to hire them so they can help him get back here because it's so easy to prey on people's desperation. There's a whole, culture of people who do that, like notarios and even unscrupulous attorneys, or anybody in between who just wants to take advantage of people's desperation. So Ethel called me up and said, how can I get him back here? And I said, well, let me talk to Pedro and find out what happened. And this is what I found out. Pedro was born in Mexico. His mother brought him here when he was 3 months old, and she raised him in Arizona under the false belief that he was a U.S. citizen. She told him he was born here. Well, he didn't know any better. And like many kids, they grow up here thinking they're U.S. citizens. The only difference is when you live on the border, a lot of times you cross over into Mexico. And back in the day, when he's now 41, so we'll probably go back into like, the late 1990s, early 2000s. Even at that time, kids, students in their teens would go down to Mexico to Nogales and maybe party on the weekend or do something, just go across the border. And he would go over with his pals and they would all bring their school IDs. And back then, a lot of the Border Patrol agents, INS agents, would wave them back in
Yeah.
and say, come on in. And they would show their school ID and they'd say, we're going back to go to school at Sunnyside High School or Pueblo or whatever. And I'd see this time and again. Now, one time when he was around 16, 17 years old, he was coming across and the agent stopped him and said, I'm looking you up. He looks him up, doesn't find any evidence that he was born here, accuses him of making a false claim to citizenship, which, by the way, if you make a false claim to citizenship and you don't, uh, at that moment, say, I'm not a citizen, it has to be contemporaneous with that.
Yes, the
It
retracted.
is it is a permanent bar from any immigration legal, pretty much any legal benefit for the rest of their lives. Talk about punishment not befitting the act.
Right. Yes.
And that was part of the 96 law. So now the guy turns him away and probably gave him an expedited removal at the border. And so what does Pedro do? Well, what is anyone going to do in those circumstances? The United States was his home. He still believed that he maybe was a U.S. citizen. By the way, back in the day, they used to give them all social security numbers too. So he had a social security number. So he had no reason to think he wasn't a U.S. citizen. He just never saw his birth certificate. And who knows? Maybe he was born in in a home. I don't know. And there wasn't any proof, but you never know. Had a midwife. So, so he like probably anyone else in that situation. Came back the next day to the border, showed his school ID, and got waved in. So he got back into the country. But in his record, he has a removal order. He then lives here for another, several years, and he gets married, has a bit of a toxic relationship, and gets divorced. And his ex calls ICE on him. He gets picked up, taken back, comes back across because now he has a kid here. So what that did was that kicked in the permanent bar. He probably already had it from when he crossed back. Well, no, he came back the second time around. He probably kicked in the permanent bar. And what that means is he would never get a green card in the U.S. And he'd have to wait outside the United States for at least 10 years before he can at least try to come back and get a waiver to come or a pardon to come back. He got back here, got detained again, no criminality, nothing, and was now charged with illegal reentry.
which
And
is
so
federal
now
criminal. Yeah,
that's a federal criminal
right.
offense. So
Yes,
now
and yep.
he's toast. And
This
this
is
is
what and this is that that's even more got more factors and it's more extreme than a lot of cases. But Judge Brack, I remember I brought him to American University because, as I tell you and other folks on the border, I've been to Texas 4 times, twice to Brownsville to work with Probar, and once in El Paso. And then I got into like real Austin once, but I tell people like about Tucson, Nogales. Like the borders are fascinating to me. It's not my world here. It's a completely different practice. And so here, with Judge Brack, appointed by Republican, classic Republican.
yeah.
He says, I wanted to be a federal judge. I was excited. I wanted to do international trafficking and financial crimes and all these different things. And what does he do when he describes situations like you without even those factors? He says, Jose's mom is sick on the other side. He goes across to take care of her for a couple of days, comes back to his family here and goes back. And then you trigger these things when you do that and you trigger, a permanent bar. And it used to be when I was, in law school and I did a couple weeks on the border in Brownsville. Um, People there were no immigration right on the border. They were further in because they realized these communities were Matamoros, Mexico, and Brownsville were they each had roughly the same unemployment level, the same poverty, and the families lived back and forth, and they didn't really care as much back in the day. The border didn't look like it did at the time, or it did on the
Well, it's a
podcast.
symbiotic relationship. I mean, that's what it's always been up until, they started building the fencing around 94 and NAFTA. I mean, that's
Yeah,
when it
yeah,
really started to go the other direction.
yeah.
Because I hear from people all the time that say, yeah, border used to be something you just cross. I remember going down to Nogales and just crossing over and
As a
spending
kid.
a day down there, yeah, as a kid and
Yeah.
going to some of the little shops and stuff, and there was it was fine. But, with NAFTA, the cartel, increase and rise of violence, I mean, things started to get more militarized down on the border.
Well, and also, what, Judge Brack would say to when he was teaching or what have you, he'd say, This is my case." He would come and he would describe those facts. He would say, "I'd have to convict them." Next night, a day of that, he said, "You decide," because federal judges can't talk politics, but they can describe that. Can't make endorsement. But he said, "You decide what you want my docket to look like," meaning the public. And I think that that's the same thing when it comes to Congress, and the same thing with our, my view in the podcast is that we have a collective DNA in this country. We have everything that Trump is doing has been done before. In the 20s, when the recession hit, they sent US citizens back to Mexico. They just stuck them all on trains. And then, during the Bracero movement, the Mexican government refused to allow workers into states that segregated openly, like Arkansas. There were no Mexicans picking cotton in Arkansas and in Texas because They didn't, they fought back. The Mexican consulates always. So this is what's been here. We've also had a time where, I mean, clearly where clearly the need of an influx of immigrants was there, and then so then it just kind of gets talked about economically, which I always find awkward. We need them, for work, and it's like, no, but that's not going to cut it necessarily either to change the paradigm, because we have to say what has allowed um this to happen, uh where there's resistance, but it's still happening. Like, what is it? And we have this in our DNA, and I think what Judge Brack was saying, I have no interest in that. And people say, well, but we all want criminal. Nobody wants anybody who's going to do things that harm other people, be it, your 40-year veteran Army U.S. citizen, fourth generation uh, uncle who might beat your aunt, or your or somebody who's painting your house without documentation. Like, the fact that somebody's documented has, as we know, nothing to do with crime. We know that those are fake, and then people can say, well, yeah, but one person here, if we had enforced immigration law, even though it's not the majority of immigrants, that person wouldn't be here. And we know, like, when you're talking about the conversation at that level, there's nothing that we can really say, because it's so far from what is a normal way to look at it.
Well,
And
what's
it comes down
always
to
going to
attitude.
happen is the the minority and cases in those minority scenarios are always going to get the most attention. That's the way the media runs with stuff, and that's how, especially right-wing media, that's how Trump ran on it. I mean, he brought the angel moms on stage. I mean, the horrific things. Like, I will decry it from, morning to night that, if you get drunk behind a car and you kill somebody, you should face justice for that. But on the other hand, the way that Trump has used that to manipulate his supporters and to convince them that all immigrants are criminals and rapists and so on and so forth, he's been out there saying that since 2015. And now all of a sudden, in the minds of his supporters, all immigrants, no matter what their situation, are somehow criminals. And that's a dangerous mindset to have, which makes it even all the more ironic that all of a sudden, once people started to push back on his raids, especially on the farms and in hospitality, he suddenly said, no, 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 we're not going to go after them anymore. Okay, well, what about everybody else, dude?
Right,
Like
right.
you're just like your tariffs. You have absolutely no juice. You just say whatever you want depending on the day of the week or whatever, whoever's in your ear at that time. Have a fucking spine, dude. Like, definitely step up. If this is the way you truly believed and how you've spoken, all of a sudden you're backtracking.
Well,
I'll
it,
hold
it,
himself accountable for being, all of a sudden he's like, and I'm okay with that. Like, don't go after these farm workers, but don't go after individuals either. Like, why does it have to be the people that, suddenly got in his ear? You know what I mean? And
well, yeah, and also I think that this is what I think this is why collectively, like, when going back to before, when you were talking about the event you did in December,
yeah,
I did something similar in 2016 after that election with the ESL, the public school teachers here. In fact, one of them, that's how I met the musician, Jeff Barsky, Insect Factory, who does the intro and outro to the podcast. He's a fourth grade teacher at a heavily Latino school in the area, and that's how I met him. But he and other ESL teachers came and just asked, like, what we know, these communities, what can we do so kids come to school? And then you're working with the community, And what felt good about that is like what you were saying, what's inspiring about that, as opposed to, just even the work we're doing, which is a lot of it's triage and it's good because we're there. But we know that there's so much noise to push out. And we know that um, it's a narrative that people have. And when people and even, beyond them, when people in the community would do the same thing and ask me these questions, I'm like, well, you want to be there when ICE is there. And I'm glad that there are people out when ICE is in these areas and just shadowing them and being there in the community. But you want to say, what do you want as a community? Like, how can it be that I mean, it's almost embarrassing when you get into a conversation with somebody and you ask, like, what's the problem with the immigrants? Well, they're breaking the law. Oh, so if you don't know people who like blow off paying their taxes, jump a turnstile, don't pay on the bus, all these different things that are, I said, I don't know if your neighbor yeah, claim things on their taxes and then they got fined for it. Do you shun them? Do you want them out of your community? I mean, what is this proportional thing that you're doing? And I think people and then I think there's a big slice of people who just feel like they can't talk about immigration because it is so complicated,
Yeah.
and we know that their takes are always going to be wrong because our takes are wrong half the time, and we've been around 2 decades. How often do
Let
we
me
do that? Is this really true? No, this is what's going on. So, you
let me
need
give
it
you
as
one example, which I think spoke volumes to me, and then I'll also talk a little
yeah,
bit about what is my pathway to winning this seat and
yes,
how am I going to do it and how am I going to talk to, I mean, I'm not just a one issue person.
right,
Immigration is I'm a subject matter expert on, at least I think I am. But like you said, some days you feel like you're not because it changes so often. But let me just give you a prime example of the absurdity of our immigration system and how people who always think they know or understand it or say do it the right way or get in line, they're not they're just not right. Like they just don't understand it. I had a man come to my office. It was about 2018. Um, and my mom came, who I worked with, came into my office and said, wait till you see your next consult. And she had this big grin on her face. And I was like, uh-oh, who's in the waiting room? So I go out into the lobby and there's a man sitting on the couch, older dude, probably in his 60s, wearing a Make America Great Again hat on. And on the other side of the couch he was sitting on was a woman, she's probably about 10 years or so younger than him, who was a Hispanic woman. And I said, all right, come on back, guys. And they come back into my office, and I'm like looking at my notes from my intake, and it's a married couple, and he's trying to figure out how to get her legal status here. And of course, the MAGA hat's super distracting, being that he's in an immigration law office in the heart of what's going on at that time. And he even pointed out, he was like, "Yeah, I'm a Trump supporter, but I just believe immigrants should do it the right way and blah blah." The standard.
yes,
And I didn't even bring it up. He brought it up. So here's the craziest thing. Um, we're about 40 minutes into the consult. I've told them about what options they have to immigrate her. Um, and one of the things that's unique to the southern border is that different ports of entry, so whether it's Ciudad Juarez or Agua Prieta, Douglas, or Yuma or Tucson, each one has, like, if you're from Mexico and you're entering on a border crossing card, which is just like a little visa, um, if you're coming in on the border crossing card and you come through a certain port of entry, you can stay a certain amount of time and go a certain distance from the border. So, like, for example, if you come through Nogales, through the port of entry in Nogales, you can stay up to 72 hours or go up to about 100 miles. I think it's 100 miles from the border. But if you want to go any further or stay longer, you have to let the agents at the border at the port of entry know, and they have to issue what's called an I-94, which allows you to stay longer than that amount of time or allow you to travel further north. At and the crazy thing is at a different port of entry, it's up to 30 days. So, and they don't give you any document when you come in that says you're allowed to stay 72 hours. So nobody really knows, even though they're, supposed to know how long they're allowed to stay. Okay. So this guy who's here with his wife, he goes, yeah, my wife comes in with me and we stay. A lot of times we travel around the country in an RV and we stay, for the 6 months that she's allowed to be here. And I go, well, does she get an I-94, a permit? He goes, no. I'm like, well, guess what, Mr. MAGA? She's been violating the law every time she comes here, and you had no idea. And that his jaw hit the floor. But that illustrated right there how stupid our system can be and how complicated. And the fact that these individuals who think they know it all and know everything and tell you to do it the right way, even when they're trying to do it the right way, they're not sometimes.
Right. Right.
But
And we
there you
see
go. I
that
mean,
among,
crazy. Like he was just like, well, we didn't know that. And I said, yeah, well, welcome to Immigration 101, bro. Maybe take the hat off.
yeah, and you're no different than other, and that's the thing is that and I do believe, I do think, and I've always thought that once we don't have the fear, and we push for something, and they see that we're pushing for something positive, um, the fight isn't as strong, and I mean, I was appointed by the Maryland bar to be on, when Martin O'Malley was the governor of Maryland back in the early teens, the early 2010s.
Okay.
And I was appointed on the governor's commission to study the impact of immigrants on Maryland. And we had Republicans on the commission, we had legislators, we had business people. It was a group of people that had to be on there. And so I represented the Maryland bar. And I was charged with writing the section on community policing, 287G, to do that. And the
I thought you were going to say you were charged with a crime.
nah, charged the other way. Yeah, no. So I was charged with doing that. And I mean, I just wrote it out. And there was no real opposition, when we pushed for it, there was no real opposition, but it was an agenda. It was a response that the community was really having at the time towards, they were pretty organized against having the police involved. And uh, and that's something that every president was against. Every president wanted to have local police cooperate to some extent. I mean, for Trump, it's much more authoritarian the way he wants it, like you will or you'll get arrested. But with Obama, he supported it.
Yeah.
Bush supported it. They all supported that, and we opposed on it. And then people generally, I mean, in the state of Maryland, we don't detain people for immigration purposes here because the state decided we don't want to do that. I mean, people voted. People voted in a referendum to give in-state tuition. So these are things I think in when people look at what's in their community and uh the vitriol is down and the negative stuff is down, then you have, you're building a community and everybody's involved. And that's where I think the value of, I mean, you've got the knowledge, but even people who don't necessarily have it, some of the champions that are in Congress now who aren't necessarily immigration lawyers in the technical part, they know the community and they don't want their community affected. And I remember, when I first met Beto O'Rourke was in El Paso. We were on the panel right before him. I look up and there's a guy twice my height walking in. It's like, oh, yeah, yeah. Because I took to him right away when he got elected because he opposed in his first term the Democratic pushed bill then was, okay, we're gonna add, I think it was 80,000 new border patrol because we want it to be a massive vote rather than a close vote, a massively supported bill. And Beto said, "You're ruining our communities. You're ruining our border cities with that because you're militarizing it and you're creating an atmosphere of fear." And I was like, wow, this is good. This is good. I mean, he beat the then head of I forgot his name, but the then head of Customs and Border Protection in the Democratic primary then. So I kind of think of that as an analogy in some senses to you running and saying, look, we're all part of the same community. So I'm going to let you shift now because I know you want to talk about you're not running for president of the immigration bar. You're not running for chair of the immigration subcommittee. And
HOA.
in fact, that person last year, Alex Padilla, the
Yeah,
chair of the immigration subcommittee in the Senate, was not only assaulted last week by
press.
Governor Nome, Secretary Nome's her goons, but also he was taken off by Chuck Schumer, the committee last year to negotiate a quote bipartisan immigration bill, and replaced by Chris Murphy and your former Senator Kirsten Sinema were the two on there. So which took away the person who was in the community and was working with it. So you I
Uh,
think this is a good place for you to jump in and say, not
well,
just the immigrants, but what about the rest of the
of
issues?
course.
How does it equip you?
I mean, you can lead with immigration. Immigration is the issue that you have to lead with, as a border community that is dependent heavily on immigrants and immigrant labor, especially not only in our community, but all over the country. And the fear that's being propagated by this administration and the tactics being used, the trickery and deception being utilized by ICE to arrest and detain people, and the fact that they're arresting US citizens and people who they're not even supposed to be. Like in Tucson, they arrested a US Marshal by mistake. How do you do that?
How did
They
they do that?
they said he looked like the person that they were trying to find, which I bet you can probably guess what demographic he was.
Yeah.
All right. So
Yeah.
so I think the more that these things are occurring, the more egg on the face of this administration and people who support it, which includes Juan Ciscomani, who's the representative of District 6, Arizona. Now, the demographics of District 6 are, pretty, I would say somewhat diverse, but it's like majority, white people, and then you've got a large Hispanic population, or pretty large, and then there's a lot of just smaller, sections. But when you look around the district, you've got 5 counties. You've got Pima County, which is the county that Tucson's in. So there's you got your urban community. You've got more rural communities on the outskirts, but you still have some decent sized cities in the Cochise County area or in Pinell County, and then there's Graham and Greenlee. So as a candidate, you really have to focus on a few things. Number one, immigration reform is of utmost importance. We got to come up with some better pathways. We need to get rid of some of those 96 or a lot of those 1996 provisions. We have to talk to people about their concerns about the border and border security. I mean, that is not something that you should walk away from. You still have to find out why people have these fears or these problems with our border. And I think a lot of them is because they've had to deal with, the aftermath of people being forced to go through the desert and wind up on their property versus legal pathways to permit them through ports of entry. You know what I mean? And so, if border and the security of the border is something that's going to obviously be part of the conversation and the negotiation of any sort of, border or immigration bill. But if we're going to focus any resources, they should be smart. They should focus a lot more on the flow of drugs that comes through our ports. Primarily, I think it's like 80% of like fentanyl and other drugs come through the ports of entry. A lot of them are brought over by US citizens. And so I think there has to be honest, candid talks about that. On top of that, we got to focus on what's hurting people, especially in the working class. The lack of certain benefits, especially for veterans. Veterans don't get what they deserve, especially when it comes to medical care. Many of them, I think, what I was reading was 13% of the people who are unhoused or homeless are vets. It's a huge number, and we got to try to work with these individuals and help them with the PTSD and the mental health issues that they face. The creation of jobs. I mean, in Arizona, we live in an area where the sun is baking us, 330 days out of the year or something like that. Solar energy, we could be one of the leaders in the world in solar energy and creating so many clean energy jobs and using that for purposes of desalination and it works in with the water issues that we have on environmentally down here. So there's a lot that kind of tie into that you can talk to people about, but also, I mean, focus on what is the Republicans' plan. Their plan has been laid out in the most recent budget. That 1,000+ page behemoth that included provisions like let's cut your Medicaid, let's cut your SNAP, let's take millions of people off of Medicaid rolls. I mean, these are just going to hurt our communities. And they're going to hurt many of the very people that have voted for the Trump administration and for this. I think if you can focus on that and how it's going to hurt them economically and how Trump's tariffs hurt us, the cost of goods going up, the fact that we're allowing plainclothes ICE agents to just run amok basically and arrest people and do so in ways that again are tactics that harken back to Nazi friggin' Germany. We have to make people understand that this is not just going to be hitting immigrants. They're going to end up, going to people's homes or going into businesses and potentially arresting their workers and their friends and their family members. So I think if you can talk to people on that basis and you can say, look, what this administration has done has betrayed your trust in government. They have gone in with a plan to, make the government more efficient, but they're doing the opposite of that. Everything they're doing is the opposite. Doge has not done anything to make our government more efficient. It's making it less efficient. It's making it less likely that people can get, for example, food boxes that come from farms. Farms get paid by the US Department of Agriculture to help feed the needy with these food boxes. And Doge is taking $500 million away from that program. Or our research community, whatever happened to wanting to bring the best and brightest, not the breast and brightest, that would be for chicken,
Yes,
the poultry community.
yes, that
Um, but we need to hold this administration accountable. And that's what I intend to do. I'm going to run on, hey, you want somebody to go to Washington in 2027, January 2027, and walk in there on day one as a freshman congressmen and say, enough. We hold them accountable. We defend our Constitution. We defend our democracy. Those are the issues that we need to focus on. And that's where the buy-in comes in, is that you have to develop a trust relationship with people to say, you know what, Juan Ciscomani doesn't represent my interests. He represents corporate America. He represents Donald Trump. He accepted Donald Trump's endorsement. I don't. I will never accept, and I'll say it over and over again. There's the 5 stages of grief, and the fifth stage is acceptance. I will accept that he is the president, that he won our presidency, but I will not accept what he's doing to our country and to our democracy.
Now, just something that I was, because I looked at your district. Your district has quite a few military, retired
Yeah.
military. It's heavily, and people tend to pigeonhole military. It's people tend to think, military all thinks one way or another. And both you and I have known, because I know you've done several of the military cases. And
Yeah.
I did like there's a project that our association has. And I did the first one in Maryland for that. So it was, and so I don't support wars, but we know who gets put in the front, and we know that it's often, how the enlistment of immigrants,
Minority
quite
community.
high. Yep. And
Yeah.
so we see that, and so, and in that particular case, the spouse, who got her green card, in that case was the commended for being a moral leader uh the for the families of deployed troops.
Yeah.
And what whatever we feel about the wars, and I certainly do not want the military to be this big, et cetera, but these families, these folks are deployed, and these families are sitting here, and often they are, they didn't want they didn't want a soldier to be worried about their undocumented family, so they created a pathway sort of for them in essence. So, in the use of the Marines this time, just like the use of the National Guard by Governor Abbott, last year, the year before, but the use of but he sent, was it the Army, and did he send two branches into LA, or was it
I
one
think it
branch?
was National Guard and Marines,
National
right?
Guard and Marines. So it's, yes, so the National Guard and the Marines. So I'm wondering if you've had any discussions with any of the military folks in your area, or what you anticipate, or how you will, because I
Sure.
know from, people that I've talked to, and my cousin who was a police officer in Pennsylvania when I was working on this stuff, he's like, "No, I don't want to be a immigration officer. I want that person to tell me who robbed them." And so, as a cop, that was his view, and he was just a
So
regular cop. And I'm wondering if these military folks, or if that's an issue that.
I haven't heard directly from anyone, I
Mhm.
haven't talked to anyone I don't even know if they would be able to talk to me about it under their orders right now.
Sure.
But I will say that our police chief in Tucson just came out with a statement basically saying that they have no interest in being involved in immigration enforcement. That's not their job. And when I've spoken with the Tucson police chief, Chad Kazmar, and other people within local law enforcement, it is not a benefit to them to be anywhere near the immigration issues because it destroys any sort of semblance of trust that they have with the communities. Because communities will be less inclined to call um, law enforcement when criminal acts actually occur. And they'll be afraid it has a chilling effect on it. And they want that. I mean, it's one of the reasons why we got the U visa for victims of crime. It was to give people some sort of benefit or reward for actually communicating criminal acts that they were victims of
Yep.
or indirect victims of. I mean, it's smart policy. You know, I think that when you do talk to people in the military, and again, service members put their lives on the line for us. and they are doing it because they want to defend our country. And I think the use of them in the in the ways that we're seeing right now, whether it be against our own people in protest, or on the border, militarizing areas of the border with the military, that that is not what the use should be for. It shouldn't be used against our own people, or being on, in some cases, tribal lands, and you know, being down there in tanks and so on, when all they're probably defending us from down there are some migrants who are crossing the border. Again, what's the best use of our resources? Let's do a
Right.
cost benefit
Right.
of
Well, best use of our resources and Mo, I think
human.
that the pendulum is shifting. I think people that I've talked to are just even supporters of Trump that I know, they're not bragging about last week. They're not happy about it. It's not a good scene for them. They're anxious. I think that it's because again, I think we have it in our DNA
Yeah.
to be both ways. And certainly I think I can't think of a state like Arizona where you can have a Raul Grijalva sitting down with Britt Biggs and
It is quite a diverse political coalition. Let's just put it
yes.
that way.
Yes.
And I think when you look at my district, it's well, the district I'm in, we have one of the largest Air Force bases, Davis-Monthan. We have the Fort Huachuca in Sierra Vista, and Raytheon is located here. So there is a large military aspect to this area. I think a lot of military, they're not happy with what's happening right now. They don't like what's happening with Trump, not allowing transgender service people to serve. I talked to one of the people running in my district. Her name is Aiden Swallow. Incredible person. I met her a couple weeks ago, and we had a long talk about why she's doing this. She served 18 and a half years in the U.S. Army, only to have it unceremoniously taken from her. And I'd say God bless her for stepping up and running, you know, in light of what happened and talking to her about it. One question I asked was, do the people who are part of your unit, do they care? I mean, she's like, no. She's like, they want me to be, I mean, do they care? They care that she's not, part of their service anymore, but they didn't care what her, orientation was.
Right.
And I think that, these are issues that are starting to resonate with people in the armed services that are like, wait a minute, like, is this administration on our side, or are they just using us and using optics like a transgender person to just push a different narrative?
Right. No, and I think that that's there, and it's good you have. When is the primary?
It's next, when is the primary? Primary is next July or August. I think it's August of
So
next
you
year.
got a year. She got a
Yeah.
year to get these done, a year to get to know people, a year to push this, and there's a lot to push. And I think the pendulum, my
Oh,
hope,
there'll be whip. I mean, when I decided I'd do this, my whole thought process was give it 6 to 12 months. There's going to be a whiplash. The whiplash effect is going to be coming. Yep. And we already just started seeing that. I mean, look at what Trump did this past week. He went from deport them all to deport them all except
yeah. Oops, didn't
the
mean
farm
that.
workers,
Yeah.
the hospitality people, the restaurants, and my golf courses.
Yeah, and we all know. I mean, look, and again, like I don't, I personally find that to be a patronizing. I mean, it's not that it's wrong. We all say it. We all know that it's particularly with the defunding of FEMA and the absolute not caring about the flooding in Arkansas and but not giving money. We know who's down there putting these houses back up. We know it in New Orleans. There's a beautiful monument that I saw there when I was there in 2019. A beautiful monument to the immigrant workers because I was there right after, not long after Katrina, and then I was there a few years later. It's like, how did all this stuff get up? Immigrant workers came. So, um, yeah, and so I think that's huge. I think you've got there's time to recreate a narrative and not just know that people are going to be tired, but come back with, hey, all right, now we can listen. Now we can present it in a way we can get rid of these Democrats who cower to this, and we can do that. So Mo, I know you'll be back, talk about when they come with immigration, the campaign, how it's going. You are, I think you might be the only one. There's usually one or two. There was an immigration attorney who ran against Henry Cuellar last time. We know our friend Margaret Stock ran for Senate in Alaska. And
Curtis Morrison is running in California.
okay,
Curtis Morrison is running in, let me look up what
oh,
district. The,
got to have Curtis on then.
yeah, you should have Curtis on. He's running just to see which district. It's the 48th Congressional District in California, which is, who is his, who's the incumbent? The incumbent, I'm just looking up, Daryl Issa.
Oh yeah, we know Daryl Issa. We all
Yeah.
know. Yeah, so that's like Southern California. Southern
Yeah, so
California.
Curtis
Yeah.
is an ALA member,
Oh,
and
good.
uh, he
Okay.
he's
Yeah.
a dude, yeah. And so, I mean, you gotta we gotta get people to step up who are subject matter experts because I was talking to somebody about this. Like, first of all, if there was ever a time where we needed lawyers and more lawyers in Congress, it's now
Yeah.
when our Constitution is under attack, and we need
I see
people
that.
to understand how to defend that and fight that in the courts. And the other thing is subject matter experts. Like the whole point of Congress is to bring people from different walks of life who have different expertise together so that we can solve problems, so we can create legislation that makes sense. We don't need people in Congress like Marjorie Taylor Greene or Lauren Boebert or
Cisco
or
Mounty.
Matt Gaetz, people like that they offer no special, unique subject matter expertise. We need people with that who can come in and speak about 212A9B and 212A9C and explain to the population at large and educate other congresspeople why our systems don't work. One of the biggest problems that congressional offices have is that they have to serve so many people who are trying to navigate the immigration system. The system is so messed up that most of their constituent services are either veterans or immigrants.
Right.
Why don't we solve some of these problems on legislation so that they don't have to be serving? I mean, they'll still have to serve people, obviously. I mean, the system is
But to
never,
have within the agencies, and that's a whole nother thing of how they've gotten rid of the internal
yeah.
checks and balances within. But that's what he's done. And then it's a matter of how because I don't think, there aren't going to be a whole lot of people on this podcast that want to go the direction they're going right now on many things, but it's the reverse. So Mo, the other job you have, which is pertinent to today, is you are a dad. So happy Father's Day. Um, if you didn't remember, you are a dad. I
Are
know you're
you
at
a
the office.
dad?
Yeah, I got two of them.
Well, happy Father's Day to you
Yeah,
too.
you know my kid.
Yeah,
So
that's an awkward. Well, yeah, now I remember.
yeah, yeah. Yeah. That's hey, it's a long campaign.
That's
But
the
anyway,
awkward thing. Yeah, like it's like when you congratulate if somebody says Merry Christmas and you're like, "Are you Jewish or do I say Merry Christmas?" I don't know.
yeah, I just say, yeah, thanks. Thanks for
Whatever,
recognizing me
bro.
for something, no matter what they say. We're not sensitive, nor as immigration lawyers when people say to us, I know you're not going to want to hear this. Oh, you're going to say some racist, ignorant stuff that you don't know that's commonly said on the news that you heard last night from a millionaire anchor of the nightly news. Yeah, no, we're used to it. It's just we absorb it, but to just
Yeah.
get out there and to have other people like your man tell, like your client there tell the story and his wife, well, geez, this is where the way it really goes. And to get that out there, little by little, I'm glad you have over a year on it.
Yeah.
Thank you for coming on.
Thanks for having me, bud.
And thank you for the music, the intro and the outro music, Insect Factory slash Jeff Barsky and producer Stephanie Buatois. And until next time, um, be well, be well, Mo, and good luck on the campaign.
Thanks, brother.
Yep. All right. Take care.
Peace.
Peace.